Canada's new Prime Minister has stepped into power just as the ground shifts beneath his country's feet. Is Canada facing its own Sputnik moment? I'm Marijan Ayandar, and today's Newsmaker is Canada at the Crossroads. What happens when a nation's bedrock assumptions are rattled by tariffs and tradition? Canada's new parliament convened under Prime Minister Mark Carney, but Canadians find themselves at a crossroads. How does Carney, a veteran of global finance who's stepping into a melting pot, deal with, on the one hand, diversifying beyond the U.S., and on the other, President Trump's looming tariff war and the offhand suggestion of annexation? Here's more on the story.
King Charles is on his first visit to Canada since succeeding to the throne 3 years ago. He's delivering a speech to open Parliament, the first by a British monarch in almost 50 years. The visit is a reminder of Canada's historical ties to the British monarchy. King Charles remains the country's head of state. But as Canada honours its past, it faces a challenging present, pressure from ongoing trade tensions and threats from its southern neighbour. President Donald Trump has repeatedly suggested a controversial idea about Canada's future.
To be honest with you, Canada only works as a state. Keeping "O Canada," the national anthem, I love it. I think it's great. Keep it. But it'll be for the state, one of our greatest states. Maybe our greatest state.
The idea has fueled unease in Canada, but Prime Minister Mark Carney remains resolute. Meeting Trump recently, Carney emphasised that Canada's sovereignty is non-negotiable, while reaffirming the importance of cooperation.
Having met with the owners of Canada over the course of the campaign last several months, it's not for sale, won't be for sale ever, but the opportunity is in the partnership and what we can build together.
Carney rose to power on the back of concerns over Trump's trade war, seen by many as a wake-up call for Canada's economic vulnerabilities. From soaring housing prices to low productivity and heavy reliance on the US economy, Canada faces challenges that demand urgent action. Some analysts compare this to America's Sputnik moment, a jolting realization that sparks swift action. Public opinion on King Charles's visit is divided. For some, the Dominion is mostly symbolic.
I would say they're symbolic, more of a historical power, but I do recognize the connection to Great Britain allows us autonomy over our bully state to the south, which is particularly worrisome with the current political leadership of Donald J. Trump and J.D. Vance.
But others question the monarchy's silence amid growing economic pressure from the US.
With the tariffs and the trade that's going on, the trade war, if the British monarchy plays a more active role in Canadian politics and standing up for Canada, then I welcome the British monarchy. But I just find personally that he's been very silent.
King Charles' visit underscores the complex balance Canada must navigate between reaffirming its past and facing a future shaped by trade tariffs and political uncertainty. With pressure mounting, Canada's next moves will define whether it controls its own destiny or watches it slip away.
Joining me now are from Madrid, Senior Fellow over at the Centre for International Governance Innovation, Jan Ciuriak, and from Ottawa, former Canadian diplomat and Vice President of the Canadian Global Affairs Institute, Colin Robertson, and from Vienna, Virginia, the Director of the Independent Women's Forum's Centre for American Safety and Security, Megan Mobbs. Welcome to all of you. Dan, let's begin the discussion with you. What's next? How should Carney balance the need for domestic economic reform with the pressures of navigating the U.S. president's evolving tariff regime?
So at the moment, in the context of the peak uncertainty that accompanies everything the Trump administration does, Canada has to basically keep all options on the table. Mr. Carney's very guarded approach in his meeting with Mr. Trump in the White House, diplomatic but very firm on the Canada's not for sale issue. which he conveyed very disarmingly with a real estate metaphor. Some properties are never for sale, like the White House. That's how he approached that, and that's the right approach. At the moment, the guidance from the White House on tariff policy going forward is that most Canada-U.S. trade is still tariff-free if it's compliant with the USMCA. That's under the IEEPA tariffs, the International Economic Emergency Powers Act tariffs. Whether or not that would continue to apply once this emergency is done and the Canada comes under the reciprocal tariff policy, which implies that there would be a 12% bespoke tariff on Canada. The moment the guidance says yes, but we can note that other FTA partners like Australia and Korea do not have that particular out. So we don't know what's going to happen, which means that Canada has to be prepared for a world in which we face substantially higher tariffs. In any event, the national security tariffs on steel, aluminum, autos, and others will continue. There's no relief in sight on those fronts. So Canada really does have to focus on nation building right now. And in my view, I think that we've got the more than enough margins of adjustment to do that and to thrive. As I write in my paper on Canada trade war, economies that are at war, wartime economies are boom time economies. So Canada could really prosper out of this. So that would be my story on that.
Okay. Colin, let me ask you, I mean, given your diplomatic experience, does Canada need sort of like a reset moment, or as Dan just put it, all options need to be on the table? I mean, what does Canada need to do without losing its dignity or leverage?
Well, the reset has begun with the election of the new government and a new prime minister who is taking quite a different perspective than his predecessor, Justin Trudeau. Mark Carney's, as Don said, first of all, get our economic house in order, reduce the internal trade barriers. We're a bit like the European community before they lowered all their trade barriers. So that's underway. We've set July 1st as our Liberation Day. At the same time, he's promised to build, as he put it, build, baby, build, the infrastructure necessary, whether we're talking about ports or roads or rail or pipelines or grids, to make us more productive and to be able to get our goods to market. And then the third piece in that, of course, is trade diversification. We have 51 free trade agreements, much more than many other nations, I think more than any other G7 nation. But our trade utilization, as Dan can well corroborate, is not high. We could do better there. And here I think our premiers are going to have to play a key role, because they're often best suited to be the specific salesman for their province's goods and services. And so we will be seeking to, first of all, improve with the European Union. And that we saw with Mr. Carney's initial visit both to Emmanuel Macron and Sir Keir Starmer in Britain, and then our links now with the Indo-Pacific.
Megan, let's continue the conversation with a different perspective. Colin just mentioned Canada's Liberation Day. You have argued that Canada is drifting from its sort of traditional values. So let me ask you, what would a values-based relationship or partnership between the United States and Canada look like today, according to you?
First off, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. You're absolutely right. What we need is a better neighbor in Canada. We are great bedfellows. We should be natural allies, which we are in a variety of different ways. But quite frankly, Canada has not stepped up on defense spending the way they should have over an extensive period of time. They've relied on kind of the benign nature of America to its south to provide that defense protection. And as a result, Canada has not made the 2% requirement for NATO for their GDP in defense. And as a result, they can't be seen as good partners when it comes to a defense alliance. They need to meet their defense spending at least at 2%. They're currently even at 1.5% under 1.5%. They're one of the lowest in the alliance. On top of that, as we're looking towards the Arctic and the requirement for us to be competitive against China and Russia, one of the panelists mentioned kind of wartime economy earlier here. The war isn't against America. In the West, we are facing a very real rising threat in the unification of all of our enemies in China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, and we should be unifying around that. And as a result, Canada needs to spend more. They need to do more with regard to defense. And then, quite frankly, they need to help secure the border between our two countries because there's been extensive and expansive opportunities for our enemies, both our enemies, Canada and America, to infiltrate America to the south from the Canadian border. So all of that to say, the Sputnik moment here shouldn't be President Trump coming into office. The Sputnik moment should have been the rising competition in the Arctic, the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia, and that should have woken up the entire Western world to the reality that we are on the cusp of something extraordinarily dangerous, and defense spending needs to increase by Canada.
Okay, Dan, let me turn back to you. Megan was saying, all right, we should be natural allies. Let me try to analyze this through your expertise. I mean, what is a realistic redefinition of the trade relationship between Canada and the U.S. look like under President Trump, especially in his second term? Because you've pointed out how Canada has always had to adjust to shocks from the United States, going back to the 1970s with Nixon and to Smoot-Hawley. Are we just seeing history repeat itself, or is this threat fundamentally different?
Well, there has been a bit of a Sputnik moment in terms of consciousness. For example, in Ottawa, me and my friends, the thought that just possibly there might be U.S. tanks rolling across the border is something that we had never thought of in our lives. And even though that's not very realistic, the fact that we thought about it is a change in the way the world works for us right now. But in terms of trade, what we're seeing now is par for the course. Canada came into being as a confederation a year after the first Canada-U.S. free trade agreement, this Elgin-Marcy reciprocity agreement, was abrogated by the U.S. in 1866. We have pivoted after the Smoot-Hawley tariffs. We pivoted to the British through the Ottawa Agreements of 1933, which created new imperial preferences. Time and again, we have had these shocks. America is not a constant. America is a changing persona. It goes from Wilsonian to Jeffersonian, Jacksonian modes. It goes from championing the international liberal rules-based order to being, very, very much focused on its own national security and national economic security interests. And Canada has to actually adapt to all those. We are by far the smaller player. And so yet again, we are facing another Sputnik moment, yet another Smoot-Hawley, another Nixon measures where we have to adapt, which all tells us that Canada has to always be able to act in its own interest. America first. America, it does not mean no allies left behind. It means every ally is left to be sort of on their own. So we have to kind of absorb that and work on that.
Okay. Colin, Dan mentioned 3 C's. He said the United States is not constant. It is changing. And this threat is about consciousness. I mean, do you feel the difference this time is that the threat is not just economic, but it is existential, especially given what Trump has said about Canada and the 51st state remark?
Yes, and I would just correct Megan, who referred to us as bedfellows. Given the predatory predilections of Donald Trump, that's a pretty unfortunate analogy to use reference to Canada. Yes, I think that the trust that was there has been shattered. It'll take years to build it back. She's correct when she points out that we need to do more in defense. We will, although we now have a new threat, and that's south of the border, which we haven't had since really post-Civil War. Again, highly unfortunate. It's hardly how you build a Western alliance when you go after your nearest neighbors. So I think that we will be making much more. Prime Minister's already said we'll put a lot more into defense. We'll continue to contribute to collective security. We're hosting the G7 in a couple of weeks, and Ukraine will be up there, and support for Ukraine will be top of the agenda, and establishing an industrial defense base with or without the United States involving our NATO allies.
Megan, I want to give you a chance to respond.
With all due respect, gentlemen, I understand that what President Trump said could be interpreted as being quite frightening. I think the reality that any tanks would ever roll across the northern border is quite frankly ludicrous. This is very Trumpian, and what he does is he makes outlandish statements to call attention to a critical problem. Gentlemen, you both acknowledge that there have been critical problems within Canada with regard to the industrial base, to national security, to ensuring the primacy of Canada. America first does not mean America alone. The president was necessarily calling attention to the reality of the situation in order, in some ways, I think, to wake up Canada. And as a result, that's happening. Of course, we want a strong Canada. A strong Canada makes for a stronger America. There is a unique binational and bilateral relationship that we have with our friends to the north. That is fantastic, and it should remain as such. We share the North American Aerospace Defense Command because we recognize American security, as in continental North American security, requires that secure partnership. It is extraordinarily difficult to have a secure partnership when one of them isn't pulling their full weight. So yes, some of the rhetoric can be frustrating and challenging and over the top, but sometimes it's necessary to do that in order to have a recalibration where then both nations thrive more together in partnership and unite against our common enemies, which is not each other, which is overseas with Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran, and in particular, recognizing that the closest way to reach North America, Canada, and the United States of America is via the Arctic, so that over-the-pole capability is necessary for us to unite together. And that means a strong Canada committed both to its industrial base and its defense.
Gentlemen, Dan or Colin, do you want to take a respond to this? Is it rhetoric, or is it just a shift in broader ideology?
Well,
I'll
we've
go
not
here.
seen
I'll
anything.
go first. Okay. Go ahead, Colin.
Go ahead, Dan.
Then we have Canadian politeness.
Exactly. So Megan, yeah, no, I mean, like the thing is, of course, we thought about it and immediately dismissed that possibility as being unrealistic. And of course, the U.S. Congress has already weighed in and said, look, they're not going to authorize any such thing. That's not really the point. But there is a sort of, if I can use a multiple syllable word, an ontological shock here for Canada on this, and it just says that we have to look at our history, review the shocks. You're absolutely correct on the defense thing. The world has become a much more dangerous place, and not necessarily in terms of nuclear threats of bombs flying over the Arctic Ocean. It's rather more in digital space. The infrastructure of our economy now is interactive. It's like a central nervous system that is hackable. And we need to figure out how to actually deal with that. At the same time, and all of, for example, our trade commitments on inert products, like cars that were not connected to the web, those should remain in place. We don't need to actually modify that. But connected cars, and this is a major initiative of the White House on connected cars, it does acknowledge that there is a newfound risk in these kinds of products. We do have to deal with that through some form of renegotiation of our commitments under the WTO. But we should do this in a gentleman-like fashion, I would suggest a Canadian-like fashion, whereby we sit down and renegotiate those commitments rather than putting up 100% tariffs. And just kind of final point on this, Canada aligned with the United States on 100% tariffs on EVs, electric vehicles, and then we got hammered with 100% tariffs on our canola products. President Trump is basically pulling all the auto production into the United States, so we don't have the EVs and we don't have the canola. And that's just not a tolerable way for Canada to go forward, to be caught between two elephants who are jostling for dominance in digital space. We need to have this done properly and systematically.
Okay, Colin?
No, our objective at the end of the day is to try and establish a new economic and security arrangement with the United States. You can't change geography, nor I think would we want to. The United States is still the biggest market in the world, and it makes a lot of sense. I think even Megan acknowledges that, as she said, it would make a lot more sense if Canada, the United States, and Mexico could reestablish the platform we have with people, energy, resources. The manufacturing hub makes us an important and critical platform in a world that's turning to blocks.
Colin, since we have King Charles up here on our video wall, I want to ask you: do you feel that we're entering perhaps an era of soft diplomacy, like the King's visit, and its possible role in terms of playing a larger role in Canada's foreign posture?
Yes, I do. I think that we're getting international attention because of the King's visit. It underlines the importance of institutions and our own checks and balances. And again, we're a very different country. We've evolved differently from the United States. We have been friends. We are neighbors. We are allies, although that's a question mark about how reliable our southern ally is. Yes, I do think that's correct. And I think that what you're seeing is an example of soft power. We still want to attract a lot of talent. That's important for us, and we want to be able to trade with the rest of the world. So the King's visit is putting a spotlight on Canada. I think giving a sense of the brand as a diverse place, a green place, and a place where people from all countries can come and live very well and happily.
Okay, Megan, I mean, how does the U.S. respond to Canada if there is a shift, a visible shift, pivoting more towards the monarchy rather than U.S. leadership?
I mean, how much is Canada going to actually pivot towards the monarchy, and how much can the monarchy actually do in terms of assisting Canada? It's largely a symbolic relationship. I think it's wonderful for Canada to continue in that capacity. I would actually argue that Canada should revert more to their kind of traditional, values-based country. I think it's great for Canada. In general, I also think it's great for the U.S. We have fantastic relationships with the U.K. We are reliable partners. Pushing Canada to do more doesn't make us unreliable. It means we're asking to be mutual reliable partners when it comes to some of these things. And we also know, let's just be honest, President Trump loves the monarchy. We know that he loves the pageantry of all of that. This is a great move for Canada. We should be celebrating it in the same way that we should also kind of put aside the rhetoric. There obviously is a place for gentlemanly discourse. And gentlemanly discourse has not always worked with regard to demanding our allies to do more. Sometimes it has taken that Trumpian approach for our allies to recognize we're not playing around anymore. This is necessary. This is critical, not just for us, but for your safety and security, as evidenced by the number of countries in the NATO alliance who have stepped up defense spending, both under the first Trump administration and now again committing to even greater defense spending. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's necessary just to bring a stick to the fight.
Dan, as we're slowly coming to the end of our conversation, you said that there's surprising consensus around what needs to be done. So is Carney's biggest challenge not policy design, but rather public mobilization, you feel?
It's absolutely execution. We went through a period of time where, for decades, where everything was basically outsourced to the private sector. The idea was that governments should set the framework, set the rules, but not actually get engaged in anything. But right now, we're in a situation where there's peak uncertainty. Private capital sits on its hands. When you are highly uncertain, it just kind of raises the hurdle rate for any kind of investment. So our challenge at the moment is that we're about to enter a recession because of these tariffs, and not just in Canada but in the United States. I mean, with all due respect, Megan, I fully agree with you on the defense thing, but the economics of the tariff threats are such that they are causing. They're putting private capital on the sideline. So how does Canada actually execute? We do need to have some internal trade liberalization. We certainly have some options in terms of international trade liberalization. But right now, the biggest impact on our trade is the rising cost of north-south trade with the United States, not just over tariffs, but because now every single product needs to have not just the USMCA rules of origin certificate. There are like one story was that a company that had shipped a product last year to the US needed 4 times the number of tariff codes in its order, and that's a lot of expense. So how do we deal with that? So we do have to do nation building. We have to rebuild our defense. We have to put in place a bit of industrial, military industrial structure, but we need execution.
Thank you, Dan. Colin, I have about 30 seconds left. I'm going to give you the last word.
Well, I think that it's not a Sputnik moment, but it's certainly a wake-up call for Canada. And again, what we hope comes out of this is a new economic and security relationship with the United States, which has been our principal partner and ally and a good neighbor. That's the objective at the end of the day. But in the meantime, I think that we have to, as Dan has said, diversify and build at home.
All right, great stuff. Colin Robertson, thank you very much. Dan Ciuriak, as well as Megan Mobbs, thank you very much for joining us here on the Newsmakers. And thanks for watching. You can follow us on social media and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Alijan Ayamnar, and we'll see you next time.